Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio.
Hosted by me. Hello, my Kardec Radio Spiritist friends. It's so pleasant and nice to be here at 4 p.m. in the afternoon on another Thursday, bringing to you another chapter reading from the book, The Way, the Truth, and the Life, written by the Spirit Emmanuel and given to us through the mediumship of Francisco Candido Xavier and his brilliance. Today's message will be from chapter 99, entitled To Promise. And as usual, what we do is to read the message, also read the New Testament quote that Emmanuel used as his impetus, I guess, to write about. And then we, after we read the message, we make a few comments, then offer up a little prayer. And as we all know, that prayer is so very, very vitally important at this time, as we are undergoing the planetary transition and the encouragement from God continues with this virus, this astounding weather that's going on. So let's get to it. We will read chapter 99, entitled To Promise. The New Testament quote is the second letter of Peter, chapter 2, verse 19. Promising them freedom, they themselves are slaves to corruption. It is imperative, Emmanuel writes, it is imperative to be distrustful of all promises of an easy life. Jesus, who could open up the vastest horizons to astonished eyes, promised people the cross, without which they could not distance themselves from the earth in order to go to meet him. There are careless disciples everywhere who accept the deceit of unscrupulous ne'er-do-wells. We will come back to that. Well, no, I'll give you that definition. Ne'er-do-well is a person who is lazy and irresponsible. They have not yet learned the living lesson of the endeavor that they have been called upon to do in order to develop a particular activity. Those who incite revolutions and those who concoct absurd plans promise wonders. But if they themselves are victims of ambition, servants of inferior purposes, or slaves to terrible errors, how can they possibly achieve for others the freedom or ascension from which they themselves are so distant? Do you believe in saviors who fail to show actions that confirm their own salvation? You should know that you were created for a glorious ascent, but that a descent would be much easier. To ascend requires toil, patience, and perseverance, which are essential conditions for finding love and wisdom. If someone talks to you about the value of taking the easy path, do not believe it. It is possible that he or she is on the descent. But when you are when you are enabled to see consoling vistas by means of sweat and personal effort, accept the opportunity joyously. Anyone who understands the treasure concealed in obstacles and uses them to enrich life is on the ascent and is worthy of being followed. Okay, my dear friends, I looked back into the Gospel according to Spiritism and kind of searched on slaves. Due to the fact that we have slaves to corruption in that New Testament quote. And we came across chapter 17, item 7, called duty. And duty is defined there as the moral obligation of each person, first to themselves and then to others. An obligation is a very, very important word. Obligation and difficulties. These were also words used quite a bit in Emmanuel's Laws of Love that Vanessa has been delivering to us at 11 o'clock each day. Laws of Love has been going on for like 49 days now. I think we're pretty close to the end. I think we're at chapter 8, which is the last chapter. And in the Gospel according to Spiritism, they go on to say that duty is the law of life. And of course, the laws of love, as in Emmanuel's other book, that laws of love is also the laws of God, and of course, the laws of life. It is, and that duty, it is encountered in the smallest details, as well as in the most elevated acts. And that in and of itself is real important. The smallest details and the most elevated acts. We never can downplay the smallest things that we might do as a duty for people or just for society in general. The person who fulfills their duty loves God more than his fellow man or fellow beings, and loves their fellow beings more than themselves. Another important fact. How can you serve others unless you love them? That is, we put others before ourselves in all that we think, say, and do. The key word in this definition is love. Love, which is free of lust. The person, and the definition I was referring to is the person who fulfills the duty loves God more than their fellow beings and loves their fellow beings more than themselves. Love sees the beauty or the ugliness of the body, but it pictures the person as a spiritual being first and foremost. As Emmanuel writes in Laws of Love, especially chapter 8, which is the last one we're studying, entitled Redemption, sufferings is the consequence of our choices. We are always on the right path when we develop faith in God and service to others. And we do this most effectively by transforming our duties and difficulties into testimonials of faith and service to others. And, getting back to what Emmanuel wrote here in chapter 99, we see one of the, on the second paragraph here, it talks about Jesus opening up the horizons to people and promised people the cross, without which they could not distance themselves from the earth in order to go to meet Christ. And this is wrapped up again in this transforming our duties and difficulties into these testimonies of faith towards God, and also tied to the service to others. And what better example do we ever have in our life than how Christ lived his life? And Christ was all about turning anything that he ran into, any difficulty he ran into the faith in God, because he knew that everything that God put in his way was there for him to be able to teach to us, to give us an example, and to serve service the people and to teach the people that he encountered. We go on, the next couple of paragraphs talk about the careless, this third paragraph, there are careless disciples everywhere who accepted the seed of unscrupulous ne'er-do-wells. And these were the people that were very, very lazy, the ne'er-do-wells, lazy and irresponsible. And, following those people, I think we all understand, is not a good idea. And then, of course, they're the people that incite revolutions and who concoct absurd plans and promise wonders. And what better example did we have than back on January 6th when we had this number of people that stormed the Capitol, thinking that they were going to incite some type of revolution. And of course, the concoction of the absurd idea that somehow the election was stolen, that there was an enormous amount of fraud that took the election away from our former president. Wonderful examples of how people can become slaves to these terrible errors, as he writes. And he says, do not believe in saviors who fail to show actions that confirm their own salvation. Another example of what is going on these days. And then further on, you should know that you were created for a glorious ascent, but that a descent would be much easier. And of course, when you're on the descent, you're on that very wide road, that expressway of life. Whereas when you're on the narrow road, you hit a lot of speed bumps. And these, again, are those obstacles and difficulties that we must patch up on our way. If we run into these, we must take out our fortitude and our will, and we must patch that hole up in our way and carry on. And that means, of course, building our faith in God, that God says, okay, this is a big hole, you got to fill it up. We have faith in God that he's going to give us the strength and the willpower to fill that hole and move on to service others. To ascend requires toil, patience, and perseverance. And this is what we just got through talking about, which are essential conditions for finding love and wisdom. If someone talks, and then the next paragraph, if someone talks to you about the value of taking the easy path, and of course we just mentioned that there is the easy path on earth just leads you astray. It leads you into that slippery slope. But when you are enabled to see the consoling vistas by means of sweat and personal effort, accept that opportunity joyfully. And that's another key item here, which is suffering is one thing, accepting the suffering is one thing, but how do we turn this into this transformation that's been talked about in the laws of love? Knowing that our duties and obligations are there to teach us and afford us the opportunity to boost our faith in God. That's what they are all about. That is, increase our love of God and our service or help to all others. Again, either regarding our thoughts or words or deeds, or all three of them. This is how we transform things. Learning through our difficulties imprints on our conscience, not likely to forget them when they imprint on our conscience through these difficulties and the lessons that we learn from that. Now, the last sentence in the last paragraph anyone who understands the treasure concealed in obstacles and uses them to enrich life, to enrich their lives and others, is, as Emmanuel writes, on the ascent and is worthy of being followed. Emmanuel has written it as such, so that we must use our obstacles and our difficulties to raise our faith and trust in God and serve others. Then we become the one that other people can follow, which is what ultimately Christ desires all of his disciples to do, to set the example for others. And that's how we preach to people, or one of the best ways to preach to people is through the example that we live, how we live our lives, how we joyfully go through our particular sufferings and our difficulties and our obstacles. Again, it's easy to talk about, a little bit of a challenge to put into action. So let us close our eyes and take one deep breath in and exhale, and vision a picture of Jesus, Lord Jesus, and recognize God in everything we have in front of us. And nature is one of the most beautiful things to recognize God in. Also, Mother Mary and the spirits, all with us when called upon, or even not when called upon, they will be there. Those spirits, those emissaries from God and Lord Jesus and Mother Mary. At this time, we call on the vast love and infinite healing power that emanates from God and is distributed down through the spirits. Let that infinite love and enormous healing power spread across the earth, from our families to our homes, to our cities and states, and of course across the United States, and especially to that governing body, the president and the Congress and the Senate, and all others that work in the government, that we may work towards that inclusive society that has fraternity without any borders, that encompasses the whole world. Lord knows we need as much fraternity and love to blossom across our world. And let this infinite healing love be broadcast to those hospitals that care for the COVID patients, to those homes that care for the COVID patients, to the refugees awaiting a way in, a way through which to enter into a better life, no matter whether it's here in the United States or in other countries, to our jails, to our mental institutions and hospitals, to other hospitals that house other patients beside the COVID-19 patients. Let us not forget that other illnesses that are there. And let us embrace all those that are thinking or about the possibility of ending their lives. The The direct suicide people are one, but there is also a level of activity within, as we call indirect suicide, where people put themselves in harm's way for the rush of adrenaline that it gives them, not understanding the impact that this has upon the effect of indirect suicide. People that overdo drinking, people that overdo eating, people that overdo drugs and gambling, all these things that would lead one to extend the energy of life towards the material side and the senses, to embellish the senses with this feedback that is only temporary. And that is why it must be continually fed, because the gambling fetish, the drinking fetish, the drug fetish, they all do not last. Whereas the only thing that lasts is God's love, which is what we should be reaping, harvesting. This and that love is built upon what we talked about earlier, which is taking those obstacles and difficulties and those sufferings and using that as a springboard for developing that love and trust in God and that service to others. We humbly thank you for your guidance and your protection during this minor talk. And we ask permission to end this little prayer, and so be it. Well, thank you, my friends, for being here. I see Beth Cruz is here. Hi, Beth. And Gisela Dutra, thank you for being here also. I know you all know that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, Kardec Radio is there, nourishing your souls. So we just put a plug in to have people to possibly always remember that it's there. And I would like to sign off now, thanking all those that haven't signed in and all those spirits that may be watching, that we love you and we bless you with whatever blessings that we have that we can transfer to you, that our society will continue to improve through this planetary transition. So long, my Kardec Radio spiritist friends.